Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Aaron Blade, and I'm the editor, creator, and producer of what you're watching right now, Blade Talk. If you are new here, welcome, and you find this presentation helpful, informative, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Do me an even greater favor and subscribe to my channel. Always appreciate all the support that I am given. So in today's presentation, I want to go over two laws. One, do not cook a calf in its mother's milk, and my interpretation of it. And two, the rabbinical command from the Orthodox perspective of using electricity on Shabbos. Now, this comes with one huge caveat. I'm not speaking on behalf of conservative Judaism. This is just my personal take on these two laws. So if you're interested, let's hit that intro and let's begin. Okay, so this comes off the heels of a presentation that I did where I mentioned that I myself personally continuously miss the mark of not separating meat and dairy. And it comes from the Torah command, do not cook a calf in its mother's milk. Now, again, this is my own interpretation. I'm not advocating for you all to follow me. And in fact, I'd love to hear your interpretation of this command. That being said, the key to the meaning of this verse is where you find it in the Torah. Unlike most actual laws, this phrase is repeated 3 times. More importantly, each time it always comes as the very last statement in a speech by either God or by Moses, repeating what God said to him. 2 of those speeches have to do with laws concerning mandatory sacrifices for the 3 major feasts, and the third, the laws concerning what one may or may not eat. Tellingly, every time it shows up, if it were meant literally, it would be totally out of place. For example, after the long list of forbidden and permitted foods, the speech ends, "For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk." The end. It might fit if it came before the closing exhortation, but it comes after it. And at the close of the speech on the great feasts, it reads, 3 times in the year all your males shall appear before the Lord God. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with anything leavened, or let the fat of my festival remain until the morning. The choicest of the first fruits of your ground you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. The end. The point is that this command has nothing to do with prohibiting a cooking method of young goats. The phrase, "don't boil a kid in its mother's milk," is a Bronze Age way of saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. What does it mean? Simple. What is the mother's milk for? It is for nourishing her young. What is the purpose of all the Mosaic festival sacrifices and dietary laws? They are to nourish the children of God, not stew them alive. In other words, built right into the seemingly absolutist Torah is a warning, indeed an absolute command, to never put ritual forms ahead of life and well-being. The people have basic food needs. The feast and dietary laws don't apply when the Israelite is facing starvation or even malnutrition, or rather only apply insofar as they alleviate these, but may never be applied to exacerbate them. So this is my personal take on the command, don't cook a calf in its mother's milk. Other people have different interpretations. I've seen that some believe that there was a Canaanite ritual that involved cooking a calf in his mother's milk, and this command was to prevent the Israelites from falling into that ritual. But to me, don't cook a calf in its mother's milk because of the placement in the Torah. It's very oddly placed in the Torah. So I've always felt it was the Bronze Age way of saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Meaning, if your life is at risk or you're facing starvation or malnutrition, things like that, don't be so strict with the ritual laws as to deny yourself food and things like that. So, the second thing that I want to discuss in this presentation is the use of electricity on Shabbat. Now, when it comes to the use of electricity, some have commented and emailed me on this subject. Of course, I disagree with the Orthodox movement on the use of electricity on Shabbos. But what if I told you that until the 1930s, it wasn't uncommon for Orthodox Jews to use electricity? So I'll explain why I believe using electricity is permissible on Shabbos. It wasn't until a small group of rabbis led by the Hazonish who began a crusade to forbid the use of electricity at all costs. If you know the way practices spread in the Orthodox movement, it only takes one idea to challenge modernity for everyone else to follow with the absurdity. Again, they have the belief that the more primitive you are, the more religious you are. Let's go over why these handful of rabbis chose to ban electricity. I'm going to go over each argument that the Hazonish put forth and offer a counter argument from another Orthodox rabbi. Now, I want to say that I am not trying to tell anyone what to do. I am trying to offer another perspective that most don't know. Many just believe that the Orthodox is following the correct way to be Jewish without challenging them on halakhic issues. Most Orthodox don't even know why they aren't allowed to use electricity on Shabbos. My goal is to teach you to think halakhically. So we know that lighting a fire is forbidden on Shabbos. Let's define what fire and electricity is. Electricity is the transfer of electrons in a wire. Fire is the reaction of a substance with oxygen. Now let's plug these definitions into, for example, an incandescent light bulb. It surrounds the filament. The filament is a conducting wire thread within a light bulb that lights up when a current passes through it. Light bulbs are a sealed vacuum lacking the main ingredient that is needed for fire to burn: oxygen. So I just proved that based on the definitions that electricity is not akin to fire through their definitions. This is why I personally believe that you can use electricity on Shabbos. Fire doesn't equal electricity. Now let's go over the arguments that the Hazonish mentioned. We must look at the counter arguments that were provided against the claims of the Hazonish. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach disagreed with every one of the Hazonish's claims. The Hazonish's most famous reason for banning electricity on Shabbat was boneh, or a form of building. He argued that completion of a circuit renders a useless wire into a functional wire. This is in some way equivalent to someone building a house. Rabbi Shlomo's argument against this is that if someone completes a circuit that is designed to be opened and closed routinely, it cannot be considered an act of building or destroying. Closing a circuit is like closing a door or a window. And of course, I don't need to tell you that these actions on Shabbos don't go against halakha. It isn't considered building as these objects are made to be opened and closed. The next argument that the Hazonish made was that electricity should be prohibited on Shabbos because turning on the switch is creating something new. He argues that since an electrical appliance is useless until electricity is added to it, by introducing an electrical current, it causes it to become useful in terms of a piece of equipment. Rabbi Shlomo again argues that because an appliance is meant to be frequently on and turned off, this action can't be categorized as referring to an act that involves great effort. It doesn't take much effort to start a dishwasher or a washing machine. Rabbi Shlomo argued that any act that is routinely done and done throughout the day cannot be included in the rabbinic prohibition of creating something new. Keep in mind, I am not advocating for or against using electricity on Shabbos. I'm trying to show you that there are other opinions that are just as valid that doesn't get brought up because once you challenge the status quo of orthodoxy, you are quickly dismissed. This has always been my biggest issue with the movement. See, people think that the progressive movements are drifting away from Judaism into assimilation due to societal pressure or modernity. I've always felt that Orthodox Judaism is drifting away from Judaism as well in favor of rabbis that view their words on the same level as the Torah. For example, did you know in the 1950s, Rabbi Joseph and other members of the Rabbinical Council of America, the central hub of the Orthodox movement in America, engaged in a series of private negotiations with the leaders of the conservative Judaism's Rabbinical Assembly? Their goal was to create a joint Orthodox and conservative national Beit Din for all Jews in the United States. It would create communal standards of marriage and divorce. It was to be modeled after the Israeli chief rabbinut, where all the judges would have been Orthodox, while it would have been accepted by the larger conservative movement as legitimate. Conservative rabbis and the Rabbinical Assembly created a joint conference on Jewish law. They devoted a year to this effort. However, this never came to fruition for two main reasons. One was, according to Orthodox Rabbi Louis, the major reason for its failure was the Orthodox rabbis insisted that the conservative Rabbinical Assembly agree to expel conservative rabbis for actions they took prior to the formation of this new Beit Din, and the Rabbinical Assembly refused to do so. The second major reason was that according to Orthodox Rabbi Emanuel Rachman, the failure was due to the pressure from Haredi Orthodox rabbis who held that any cooperation between orthodoxy and conservatism was forbidden. He goes on to write that although subsequent efforts were made to cooperate with the Orthodox, a letter from 11 Rosh Yeshivas was circulated declaring that Orthodox rabbis are forbidden to cooperate with conservative rabbis. Again, in the 1980s, modern Orthodox Rabbi Norman Lamb, Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva University, along with other American and Israeli Orthodox rabbis, worked with conservative and Reform rabbis to come up with a solution to who is a Jew issue. In 1989 and 1990, Israeli Prime Minister Shamir spearheaded an effort to find a way to resolve the impasse. A plan was developed by Israeli Cabinet Secretary Rubinstein, who negotiated secretly for many months with rabbis from conservative, Reform, and Orthodox Judaism, including faculty at Yeshiva University. They were planning to create a joint panel that interviewed people who were converting to Judaism and considering making Aliyah or moving to the state of Israel, and would refer to them to a Beit Din that would convert the candidate following traditional halakha. All negotiating parties came to an agreement. Conversions must be carried out according to halakha. The Beit Din overseeing the conversion would be Orthodox, perhaps appointed by the chief rabbinate of Israel, and there will be a three-way dialogue throughout the process. Now, many Reform rabbis took offense at the notion that the Beit Din must be strictly halakhic and Orthodox, but nevertheless, they agreed. However, when word spread about this project became public, a number of leading Haredi rabbis issued a statement denouncing the project, condemning it as a travesty of halakha. Rabbi Sharir, chairman of the Israel World Organization, stated that, yes, we played a role in putting an end to that force, and I'm proud we did. Norman Lam condemned this interference by Sharir, stating that this was the most damaging thing that he ever done in his 40-year career. So again, many modern Orthodox rabbis don't want to do anything that upsets the RCA or the Rabbinical Council of America. And many Orthodox rabbis don't want to upset the Haredi or ultra-Orthodox rabbis. So everyone is essentially tied to rabbinic power. That power structure, it's so politicized. We see that Orthodox rabbis, every time they tried to reach across the aisle and cooperate and work with conservative or even Reform rabbis, Haredi rabbis quickly condemned it, stating that Orthodox rabbis are forbidden from cooperating with or even doing business with conservative or Reform rabbis. They shot it down each time. A recent development has been the idea of annulling conversions to Judaism, sometimes many years after they've taken place, due to a reduction in religious observance or change of community by the convert. Chuck Davidson, a modern Orthodox rabbi, expert on this conversion crisis, explains, the greatest of the rabbis wrote explicitly that even if immediately after the conversion, the convert goes to worship idols, that convert is still considered Jewish. The justification given for the change in approach is that the original conversion must have never been valid in the first place, as it is clear from the convert's subsequent actions they were insincere at the time of conversion. A situation of confusion in Jewish identity in Israel was made worse when Haredi Rabbi Avraham Sherman of Israel's Supreme Religious Court called into question the validity of over 40,000 Jewish conversions when he upheld a ruling by the Ashdod Rabbinical Court to retroactively annul the conversions of a woman who came before them because in their eyes she failed to observe Jewish law. This crisis deepened when Israel's rabbinate called into question the validity of soldiers who had undergone conversion in the army, meaning a soldier killed in action could not be buried according to Jewish law. In 2010, the rabbinate created a further distrust in the conversion process when it began refusing to recognize Orthodox converts from the United States as Jewish. So you see how political this got. Following a scandal in which the United States Rabbi Barry Freindel was arrested on charges of installing hidden cameras in a mikveh to film women converts undressing. The chief rabbinate said it would review the validity of all past conversions performed by Freundel, then quickly reversed its decision, clarifying that it was joining the Orthodox Rabbinical Council of America and affirming the validity of the conversions. In December 2014, an Israeli court decided that a conversion could be annulled. They found a loophole. In his decision, Justice Neil Hendel wrote, "Just as the civil court has the inalienable authority to reverse, in extremely rare cases, a final judgment, so too does the special religious conversion court. For otherwise, we would allow for judgments that are flawed from their inception to exist eternally. Once undergone, a valid religious conversion to Judaism cannot be overturned. However, here's the loophole. A Beit Din may determine that the conversion is void as it was never undertaken correctly in the first place. In recent years, many Orthodox conversions have been overturned. That's why I've stated you may be Jewish today and not Jewish tomorrow with an Orthodox conversion. In 2008, Israel's highest religious court invalidated the conversion of 40,000 Jews, mostly from Russian immigrant families, even though they had been approved by an Orthodox rabbi. Debate on what constitutes a valid Beit Din for conversion and for annulling conversions has caused divisions in the Orthodox movement. It is an implicit judgment on the character and uprightness of the rabbi in that religious court. For example, when Rabbi Freundel was arrested on charges for filming women converts at the mikveh he supervised, the Israelis' chief rabbinate initially threatened to review and possibly invalidate the conversions done by him. A crisis between American and Israeli rabbis was averted when the chief rabbinate agreed that all conversions done by this rabbi were considered valid. So you had a Jewish Orthodox rabbi filming women going into the mikveh, and the chief rabbinate of Israel basically supported this rabbi and considered what he was doing valid. It's tripping over itself, trying to be so political and hold a monopoly on who is and who isn't Jewish. And this is why I've always maintained that I feel conservative conversions are the most organized and even the most recognized. Again, an Orthodox conversion may be recognized today, but because of all the infighting, it may not be recognized tomorrow. In 2008, they annulled 40,000 conversions. Let that sink in. The last point that I want to address that I've been getting comments and emails about is that some have commented that The conservative movement's future is in jeopardy. Many claim that our numbers are decreasing. Based on my research, this is true. However, I always caution people not to put a lot of emphasis on numbers. We know that from the Tanakh, King David wanted to do a census and was punished for it. I also love the story of Gideon in the Tanakh. You see, Gideon assembled 30,000 men to take on the Midianites. God came to him and stated, "You have too many men. Israel will boast against me, and they will say that my own strength has saved me and not God." God told Gideon that if anyone is afraid to go to battle, let them go home. 20,000 men left, and only 10,000 remained. The Lord said to Gideon, "You still got too many men." Gideon took them to get some water so they could drink. God stated, "Separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog from those who kneel down to drink." Only 300 drank water from their hands, and the rest got down on their knees to drink the water. God stated, "Let the 300 men stay and send the rest home. Now go save Israel." People often forget that God does the most with the least, so that you know it's God's will. I'm not as concerned with our numbers. Last I checked, I believe Reform made up 41% of American Jews and was on the increase. Conservative Jews made up 29% and went down from 34%. Orthodox went from 10% to 12%. So many Orthodox like to claim that conservative Judaism is dying as they increased by 2 percentage points. Even in Israel, Orthodox makes up a small portion of Jews, with most being secular. It is just that the Israeli government gives subsidies to the Orthodox movement, which makes it hard for anyone else to compete in that marketplace. They have a monopoly on who can get married, buried, etc. Haredi parties hold significant sway in coalition governments. Their votes are essential for forming a majority, so they leverage this power for budget allocations for their communities, including yeshiva funding and student stipends. So we must keep things like this in mind. So when I come on this platform and I advocate for conservative Judaism, what I want more than anything else is to teach people that you should be able to think halakhically. I'm trying to encourage people to think with a halakhic mind, and to get away from this idea or this myth that Orthodox Judaism is the original Judaism, or the Judaism that has always been practiced, the most authentic Judaism. That's not true. And Orthodoxy comes with its own fair share of problems. They're tripping over each other. The conversions have become so politicized. And every time that the Orthodox rabbi shows some kind of cooperation for other movements and saying, "Hey, let's come together. We're all Jews." And even the Reform, dealing with the conversions, and they push back on the halakhic conversions, on converts, potential converts needing a halakhic conversion. The Reform rabbis said, "Okay, we'll give in, we'll compromise." And everything was going well until the Haredi showed up, the ultra-Orthodox showed up and stated, Orthodox rabbis are forbidden from cooperating with non-Orthodox rabbis. This happened 3 times where Haredi shut it down. So, as much as some like to say that, well, reform and conservative are giving into societal pressure or political politics, things like that. And some things I agree on, some things I don't with that argument. But I can make a similar case that the Orthodox are being controlled by the Haredi. Anything that the Haredi states in terms of who the Orthodox rabbi can and can't associate with is dependent upon them. They control who you're allowed to talk to. So it isn't like the Orthodox movement has it all figured out either. Again, I am a conservative Jew because I feel like this most accurately displays Jewish history and what we've done to stay alive. We've adapted. I see the Torah as binding. I see halakha as binding. But it has to be able to adapt to the realities and the environment that we're facing today. That's how the Jewish people survive. And again, this is my own personal perspective. I just want people to think. You don't have to think the same way I do. But think. It ain't illegal yet, but they're working on it. So, if you found this presentation helpful and informative, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Do me an even greater favor and subscribe to my channel. I always appreciate all the support that I am given. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Blade Talk. Be good to yourselves, be good to others, and until the next presentation, you all take care.